Good afternoon, everyone. It's already 3:05, so I think we should start with the webinar. I would like to welcome you all to the UI Design webinar. I hope you're all doing well, staying safe. Thank you for joining today. This webinar is going to be an introduction to UI design, and it's also being streamed on YouTube. So half the participants are on MS Teams, half of them are on YouTube. The expected duration for this event is around an hour. It might go a bit over. And yeah, the last 15 minutes are designated to the Q&A session. So if you guys have any questions, you can ask that in the last 15 minutes. I would like to thank Ms. Dempsey for joining us today. She is the speaker for this event. And thank you, Ms. Dempsey, for accepting the invitation. Ms. Dempsey is currently working as a UX designer at BCS, and she has over 6 years of experience in UX design and recently in UI design. She has a passion for user-centered designs, and she shows the importance of user research through her work. And her experience in product development and customer-centric roles has led to her discovery of the UX as a career path. So, Ms. Dempsey, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for the introduction. I will kickstart then. So I'm going to be talking today around UX and UI design and the difference between the two. So I've split this session up into 3 parts. So part 1, I'll be looking at UX and UI, the differences. Part 2, I will explain what tools I use and why. And part 3, I'll look to share some tips for how to get started in a UX or UI role. So thank you for the introduction. I'll just go briefly over this slide. So yeah, my name's Lisa Dempsey. I'm a UX designer currently working at BCS, the Chartered Institute for IT. So I kind of landed myself within UX through different product development roles and customer, working in service delivery roles. So really understanding kind of users and users' needs, which is really important when it comes to user experience design. So let's start looking at UX and UI and the differences between the two. So UI stands for user interface design, whereas UX stands for user experience design. So UI is the interface itself, so the parts that create the design, whereas UX is the way that users interact with those parts. So if we look at the graphic to the left-hand side of the screen, UX typically is referred to for physical and digital products, whereas UI is usually applied to digital products only. So UX, we kind of look at all touch points, the entire experience from a user's first contact in that journey to their last. Whereas UI is typically just the visual touch points that users interact with a product. So if we think of an application or a website and the visual things that you see on that. So UX, we'll be trying to understand users, understand their pain points, their needs, and how we can create solutions for them. Whereas UI typically is looking at the visual aspects of the interface. So looking at typography, the use of colour, things like buttons and how users interact with designs, and things such as animation and imagery. So a UI designer is looking at the aesthetics of that product, whereas a UX designer is looking at the overall effectiveness and how users interact with that product. So if we look at this diagram then, which kind of shows UX versus UI in a slightly different way. So if we think of an iceberg, so UX, as you can see below the waterline, UX designer will start with understanding users, performing user research, understanding those pain points, those problems that a user might encounter and that needs problem solving. They'll look to scope out requirements, they'll work with the users, they'll work with people within the business to scope out requirements, how can we solve those user needs? Do we need to develop content? Do we need to restructure this application or web page? What are the problems here? And how are users struggling? So they'll scope out kind of those problems. A UX designer might look to create task flows, so understanding, those pain points, where are they happening along the journey, and how can we solve them? How can we map those out and understand those and create a better flow along that journey? Or possibly, how can we structure that content or that information better so a user isn't struggling to understand or achieve their goals? We also do wireframing, so we'll look at a kind of a pared down visual design of the application or a web page, which we will then share all this research with a UI designer, providing them with wireframes and scaled back prototypes, so that visual layer, so they can to help flesh out those designs. Sorry, I think I might have gone mute then, so hopefully everyone still can hear. So if we look at an analogy now of the difference between UX and UI design, so I hope you're familiar. Sorry, I think I got muted again. So if we can kind of look at this analogy of a ketchup bottle, so on the left-hand side, we have kind of what is the user experience of this ketchup. So here, a UX designer may have looked to understand how a user interacts with a bottle of ketchup. So I guess their need is they want ketchup on their plate. So how is the best way of getting around that? So UX designer might have thought, okay, we need to get it out the quickest way possible. Let's use the use of gravity, get this ketchup out the bottle. It needs to be squeezable so we can get that ketchup out quicker, and to get that last bit out of the bottle so we're not wasting anything. Whereas if we look at the right-hand side, so what a UI designer might look to achieve, so they might be thinking more about the visual aspects of the ketchup bottle, how it looks and feels. So probably a nice weighty glass bottle may suit the user a bit better. It may feel nicer. So they'll be looking at the designs also of the labelling and the typography used on that labelling, and making sure the colours represent the brand of Heinz. So that's kind of the split. So the UX designer is looking to see the problems and how the user needs to solve those problems, and the UI designer is looking how to visually please that user. But we're both working together to make sure those user goals are met. We can also, as another analogy, look at a house. So in this kind of example, a UX designer might work with the occupants and really understand how those occupants may want to live, what are their pain points. So they'll undertake user research, they'll talk to those people that want to build that house. Possibly, they don't have enough room in their kitchen to house their washing machine, they might need a utility to do their washing. So they need to make sure that their plans include a utility room. They might have, 4 cars that they need to store in a garage. So they need to make sure that they have a double garage, for example. So really understanding those user pain points and how they can create solutions, and creating a kind of a basic wireframe which they can share with that UI designer, which kind of shows all that architecture, and which a UI designer can then take and make it visually pleasing, so they can apply those coats of paint. They can decide what furniture needs to go in the house. Does it need hard flooring? Does it need carpet? So they'll be looking at all that interior design and that visual design to kind of create that home. So let's look now and dive a bit deeper. So what tasks do UX and UI designers typically perform? So if we look to, again, the left-hand side of the diagram at the UX kind of designer's role. So as I kind of briefly said before, so a UX designer will undertake research. They'll try and understand those user needs, typically by running user research sessions, so interviewing their typical users. They might run surveys, collect analytics, things like that. When we talk about information architecture, we're talking about kind of site structure or app structure and content structure. So if you think about a typical website, a type of information architecture could be referred to as the site navigation. So as you click on those mastheads and click down through content, that's all the information architecture of a website. So a UX designer will look at creating that architecture and that site structure. As I said before, we also look to do wireframes and create prototypes based on all that research and that we've done previously, understanding those user needs. So we set out our solutions through the use of wireframes and prototypes. We'll also look at interaction design. So how do we want users to interact with our application or our website? So if you think about when you've used a website or application before, like the use of buttons. So as you hover over buttons, usually there's a change of state. There's a reaction when you press a button. So all those types of things somebody needs to design. And that role does form part of a UX designer's role too. A UI designer, if we look to the right-hand side of this diagram, they'll be looking at the visual design aspects of that website or application, for example. So they need to be skilled in the use of colour. So understanding firstly, what a brand's colour is. So if you're working for a specific organisation or brands, they'll have their own colour palette that they might want to use, but colours represent different things. So there's colour psychology that sits behind all of that. So if you think yellow could be seen as happiness and sunshine and at-partedness, whereas blue is typically used for more serious organisations such as finance institutions. So blue could be represented in that way. Green is seen as more of an eco colour, so more eco brands may use the colour green. So just understanding like this colour psychology and what colours mean within your designs. They'll also be skilled in graphic design. So being able to manipulate photos, create animation, things like that. They need to be aware of best practice in UI layouts. So there's kind of laws that dictate good layout. So like proximity of certain items and things like that. So understanding those laws and best practice within layouts, and being able to create reactive layouts as well. So being able to design for any device type, so iPad, mobile, websites. Also, they need to be skilled in typography. So again, different types of fonts can represent different types of feelings. So if we think about Comic Sans, might be seen as a more informal font, whereas Times Roman typically, again, is seen as more of a formal font. So understanding the uses of typography is really important for a UI designer. So if we just recap quickly then, so a UX designer, they should understand users primarily. So they should start with extensive research. They'll have a goal to understand their audience and their audience wants and needs. They'll create design strategy. So they need to understand the purpose of the product and they need to be able to map a logical journey or task flow. They need to analyse the design of interactions, so understanding how people or users will use their products, understand those interaction habits, personal preferences of a user, and possibly any shortcuts they might use when interacting. And all of these things should help to create better design solutions. And finally, as a UX designer, we create wireframes and prototypes to show our ideas and propose our plans. Whereas a UI designer, they need to be skilled in graphic design. So again, they need to understand that colour psychology, typography, iconography. They need to be able to interpret and apply a company's branding, so be really familiar with their brand's identity, their tone of voice, the colour palettes and their typography guidelines. They need to be able to implement UI patterns, layouts and best practices, and the laws of those. And they need to be able to create responsive designs, so making sure that their designs look great on any screen size or resolution. So UX or UI, I guess that is the question, I guess. So to kind of summarise and simplify, do you enjoy listening to people and uncovering problems and developing solutions? Does that sound like you? So UX is primarily understanding how things work and why, based on user research, and ensuring the user's needs are met through good design. Or do you enjoy experimenting with colour, typography, and animation? So UI, again, is primarily about creating visually pleasing designs which match a company's brand identity. So if we look at the graphic then, on the left-hand side, there are kind of crossover skills. So both kind of UX and UI designers need empathy. So they need to really be able to relate to their users. They need to have great communication skills, be open-minded, be able to problem solve and think through solutions. A UX designer, they typically need to be skilled in user research and analysis techniques, so understanding things such as Google Analytics and different data analysis tools. Need the ability to be able to wireframe, need to understand how to kind of create great information architecture, so how to use hierarchical elements to make the content flow properly, and be able to perform user and usability testing. A UI designer needs to be skilled, as I said, in visual branding, understand colour theory, icon design, typography. Again, need to be skilled at wireframing, knowledge of responsive design, and possibly it would be great for a UI designer to be skilled in animation and interactivity. But both roles need researched techniques, so be able to look outside their company, look at what the industry is doing, look at what fellow UI UX designers are doing. Both roles kind of need to have good project management skills to make sure projects are moving along properly. But I guess I would say you can do both. So UX and UI can be seen as two separate roles, but And in major corporations, there'll be teams that solely do UX and solely do UI, and you can break UX down to loads of different roles, so UX researchers or usability testers, whereas smaller companies such as BCS, we do both. So within my role, I do kind of high fidelity wireframing. So I do add colours. I do look at best practice in layouts and things like that. So in smaller companies, there is scope to do both, and you don't have to specialise. But I guess it's down to preference also, like what you prefer doing. So part 2, what tools to use and why. So at BCS, the tools that I use within kind of our process. So for research, we use surveys tools such as SurveyMonkey. We use HubSpot. We use different kind of surveying tools depending on kind of the projects that we're working on. We use Google Analytics to understand kind of our website traffic and our how users are interacting with our web pages, and we can kind of unpick problems looking at that data. Hotjar is another tool we use. So Hotjar is a heat mapping tool, so we can look to see for specific web pages how users are interacting with that web page, what are the hotspots, you know, what are users typically clicking, and where are they not even looking. So again, kind of using that data, we can understand how people are interacting or not interacting with content on our web pages. UX, so Microsoft Teams and Zoom, we perform kind of face-to-face research through those, so talking to users and, you know, possibly sharing wireframes or just interviewing them to understand how they use our website product application and unpicking any problems or pain points. UX Playbook and Optimal Workshop are another couple of tools that we use to do research. So UX Playbook is a paid-for kind of research platform where we can recruit participants to perform research through. Optimal Workshop is a tool where we can, again, do some tests. So we can test our information architecture through Optimal Workshop and understand how people are navigating through certain structures. Prototyping, we use Figma within BCS as our primary tool. So Figma at the moment is kind of the market leader in prototyping kind of software. It's free to use as well as a kind of a basic user. So I really recommend having a look if you're interested in UX or UI, just playing around with Figma. Other tools include Exure, Sketch and Adobe XD. So for testing, we use, again, Microsoft Teams or Zoom. So we perform testing through just video calls and getting our users to screen share with us, and we can take them through kind of some scenarios and just understand how they're using our web pages or products. Optimal Workshop, again, allows for kind of usability testing, so understanding if users can perform specific tasks that we might set or they might need to achieve through our website or application. And UX Playbook, again, allows us to do user testing and usability testing. So they're kind of our tools of choice at the moment. So tools used in the UI process. So again, our tool of choice for prototyping is Figma. For asset creation, our creative designers use Adobe After Effects, Photoshop and Illustrator to create those graphic design elements. So that's kind of a summary of kind of the tools that we use. So part 3, kind of how to get started. So I really recommend just having a play. So find a website or product or app and start thinking about how you can improve it. Think about who those users might be and why they might be using that website or app. Can you see any problems? Is there something that doesn't feel right? And then possibly, jumping onto Figma and playing around, maybe replicating what you can see on the website and creating your own little tweaks. I recommend reading. So if I ever have a problem or an issue or I need to learn something new, I'll typically just Google it. There's hundreds and thousands of articles out there, some really good blogs, which I've got a reading list I'll come on to in a minute. Learn. So again, if I ever need to build something new, so if I need to prototype something new that I've never prototyped before in Figma, and I'm not sure how to do it, I'll usually just jump onto YouTube and type in, what I'm looking for. So maybe I'm looking to create an interactive carousel that I haven't created before. And there's usually step-by-step guides on how to do things like that. So yeah, YouTube is a really good source. And I guess so just understand, what do you really enjoy and what are your natural strengths? And that might help lead to like an understanding whether UX, so like that more analytical thought process, is more aligned to your preferences, or are you more creatively driven? So do you prefer like playing with colours and typography and creating like graphic design elements? Is that more you? But yeah, so just having a little think about what you enjoy. So looking at some resources here then, so courses. So the Interactive Design Foundation, they are a membership organisation aimed at UX designers. I'm a member myself, so it's a yearly fee. I think you can pay monthly, and they have loads of free courses. So they have kind of career pathways as well. So if you're really interested in UI design, there's a pathway and a course structure that you can follow. If you more broadly want to look at UX and UI, again, there's a kind of certification pathway that you can follow. If you want to specialise maybe in research and become a UX researcher, there's a career certification pathway you can follow, and it's all part of your fees. So you can get certifications along the way, which I think is really good. So yeah, I really recommend the Interaction Design Foundation. Udemy, another one. So you can take short courses through Udemy. They're quite cheap as well. So if you want to learn a specific thing, then I recommend Udemy. If you're looking at more formal qualifications, if that's something you're interested in, UX Design Institute offers more formal UX certification. At Kendi.com, I took UX certification through Kendi.com about 2 years ago now. I found them quite a good provider. So again, that's more formal, like course-led certification with an exam at the end. And generalassembly.com, they are kind of the market leader right now in UX certification, but again, they're a little bit more pricey. So blogs and articles. I really recommend Nielsen Norman. So Nielsen Norman, they are kind of the founders of UX as a discipline, and I think they even termed the phrase user experience back in the 70s. So they are kind of the forefathers of UX design, and they're always the place I start if I want to learn something or, just understand theory on something. I usually refer to Nielsen Norman Group. Again, the Interaction Design Foundation, they offer great content, and I think you can get the content for free as well if you're not a member. I get weekly emails, so content comes into my inbox, but they do have content on their website. And UX Collective also, they are a Medium blog, so they also are something that I read quite frequently, just if I have a few spare minutes and I want to learn something new. So UI resources. So it's really important to kind of look out there and what's going on right now and understand, best practice and just what's happening. So for UI inspiration, I go to awards.com. So awards.com, they are a kind of website that awards new designs or cool designs. So companies or designers upload their something that they're proud of, and it's kind of judged by a community. So they can be like a website of the day, for example. But they're a good place to have a look at. Also community-led websites for UI and UX designers to share kind of their latest designs. And it's always a good place to kind of find best practice and just cool stuff that's going on right now. So for blogs and articles, I recommend Adobe XD. So there's loads of good content in their kind of content library on Adobe XD, and Figma also has a really strong community. So not only for blogs, but if you are building or playing within Figma, and there's loads of kind of layouts that the community shares, or elements, so like components. So like if you want to build a certain like button type, there's usually loads of free source elements that you can pull from the community and use within your designs, and manipulate them as well, and create what you envisage, but not starting from step one. You've already got kind of a template there. So I really recommend Figma's community too. So for book recommendations, these are kind of the books that I've always been recommended. And The Design of Everyday Things by Donald Norman, so from the Nielsen Norman Group. It's kind of a book that you're told to read. I've got post-it notes in mine, so I haven't got all the way through yet. And I'm not a big book reader. I'm more of a short content kind of person, so reading blogs and short articles rather than going through a textbook. But these are kind of my recommended books if you are a more formal textbook kind of person. So Don't Make Me Think by Steve Krug, Articulating Design Decisions by Tom Griever, and the Customer Experience book by Alan Pennington. So I have them all on my desk, but I can't say that I have read each one from cover to cover. But it is something that I will do at one point. So that kind of concludes really my presentation to you guys today. So thank you for your time, and I guess this is where we will open up for any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Ms. Dempsey. That was a great presentation. It had a lot of fruitful information. I hope people have learned a lot from it as well. If you guys have any questions, you can type it either in the chat box, or you could unmute your microphone and speak the question if you're on Teams. So we have a 15-minute Q&A session.
Thank you very much, Ms. For this presentation. I have only one question. Can we have an example of UX and how it's work and how it's created from your side? Maybe, for example, something you make it before. Can we see?
Oh yeah. So share an example of work that I've done.
Yes, please, to get clear sure. And cover all these ideas. Thank you.
I have prepared an example in case I was asked this question. So let me connect. Can you see my screen?
Yes, it's visible.
Yes.
Brilliant. So this is Figma. This is a tool within Figma. So let me zoom in a little bit. So this is kind of a current project that I'm working on. So this was at the stage of wireframing. So we're looking at a new journey within the website of bcs.org on how a user joins as a member, and how we kind of set out that information and build that journey so a user joins BCS as a member. So kind of the process that we go through is undertaking user research to begin with, talking to potential members that might be wanting to join, talking to people within the business that own this product area to understand the problems that they have, why members aren't joining at the rate that typically they may want to, or the product managers might want them to. And then we've come up with kind of different designs on how we can address those problems. So as a UX designer, we kind of propose different solutions. So as you can see, this is kind of a wireframing of different solutions. And we set out pros and cons to these solutions. We've undertaken research as well. So we've presented these wireframes to potential customers to see their thoughts on these changes, and if it makes understanding membership or joining as a member or buying membership easier. So this is kind of the UX side of things. So understanding the problem and providing some solutions and researching whether these solutions will work or not by talking to users. And if I skip, so these are kind of different options that we might have gone down. And if we skip to kind of the current process that we're in at the moment, so we're overlaying UI design now. So we're adding colours. So as you can see in these kind of scenarios, they're all grayscale. There's a lot of post-it notes and things trying to explain what these things might do. Whereas now we're in a kind of a UI phase, so understanding again our company's brand. So BCS is primarily branding as grey and green. So adding kind of graphical elements such as the use of like imagery such as this. Again, this is still a work in progress, but we've designed different types of cards. And so if you, let me go in a play mode. So this may be what we kind of implement, but again, we're still working on it. So a UI designer is looking at the colours and the kind of brand assets, so imagery, the use of kind of brand assets such as dots, the interaction, as I said before, like as you hover, do the button states change? Again, interaction. So what happens? Does a user need to know where to click? So a UX designer might understand, yeah, the user needs to know where to click, whereas the UI designer will select, okay, we need green because it matches our colour palette. We need to add an image in here which represents that particular thing. So I hope that kind of explains a little bit more detail the difference between UX and UI.
Okay, I think we have a raised hand.
Hi, thank you for your time. My question is, one second. Is there any guideline for designing an application or website? For example, the application for the font size, the icons, the color, even because when I design it in a graphic, so the colors when I develop it, it's showing different. How to doing this one before I face this issue? This one, the first one. And the second thing, if I have two language to design it in one, for example, application, suppose Arabic with English. So the font, it's confused with me. It's hard to find the similar fonts, for example. So what the solution I have without spending more time in searching? And thanks.
So I guess to talk about your first question around the use of colours and things like that. So a big consideration that we have is around usability. So and colour contrast. So making sure from a usability perspective that there is sufficient colour contrast for the user to distinguish between colour states. So, for example, for colour blindness or short-sightedness, there needs to be sufficient colour contrast to meet kind of usability guidelines. In terms of, we face kind of a similar issue where we have a non-digital brand guidelines which say that we should use certain colours within our brand. But as you apply them to a digital kind of medium, like our website, the colours respond differently. So I suppose it's like having the ability to adjust those colours to make them visually match what you expect them to. But I hope that kind of helps Elizabeth with that question. In terms of the typography, I can't say that I'm too familiar with the use of different fonts and how they translate into different languages. I've not come across that problem myself within my current role, so I don't have a great answer for you on that one, unfortunately. But I hope you figure it out.
Okay.
I have
yeah.
last question. So first thing, when we start to think and develop the mobile, for example, mobile application. So first we will start with the UX, then we'll start with the interface.
Yes. Yeah, so we always start with the with understanding user requirements, so understanding what the application or website needs to do primarily, and the UX designer will kind of create that wireframe and that blueprint by understanding those user needs, doing all that research and creating that plan. And then the UI design comes secondary to that. So once that plan has been formed and those wireframes have been created, the UI designer will come in and add that visual layer. But as I said before, it depends kind of what that company entails. Does it? There may be roles within that company that a UX and UI designer are the same person, so they'll perform both roles from part A to part B. But it depends kind of the size of the company and the company resource, whether they have specific roles for UX and UI. But it can be done by one person if that one person has the capacity to do that and the skills to do that.
Thank you very much. Thank you for this presentation and answering these questions. Thanks.
So we've got a question in the chat, can we convert UI to code? So within Figma, once we've created the designs and we've got the final product, there is the ability to export that code to our developers. So yes, within Figma you can.
Okay, I think we'll wait for like 2 more minutes for if anyone has any questions, you can ask. Okay, there's one in the chat box.
how will users be attracted towards UI UX design prepared by us? So I suppose to answer that question, it all starts with understanding users' needs. So what problems are they having, and how can you solve those problems? So for example, it might be an issue with the UI. So there might not be enough color contrast within some of your button states. So we have an issue such as this on our website at the moment. So our color contrasting through some of our buttons isn't accessible. So that is more of a UI issue, which we can solve by increasing the contrast of our color scheme, and that will fix a usability issue. So there is loads of different layers to UX and UI, and there's loads of overlap between the both as well. So yeah, it's starting with the user really, and understanding what are their problems and how are they interacting with your product if you've already created the product. So it's kind of an ongoing journey of iteration. So we have another question. So do you think that UI or UX design technology and methods would be good to be used in the future, or is there something more modern and advanced? I suppose you understanding kind of the theory between like the design thinking and user experience, like it's been around forever, so people always need to interact with everything, and there's always going to be problems with people handling people's designs, because you're not that person. You've created something to solve a user's need, but people are different. Everyone is different, so people react to things differently and people think differently. So there's always going to be a need to understand how users think and how we can solve issues in better ways. There's always going to be issues that need to be solved. So I don't know if that answers the question, but I think UX and UI is always going to be here. But of course, technology moves on, and ways to design move on. So may I share my work in UX and UI design so I can get your feedback about it? Yeah, sure. I think I'll share these slides as well. Fairware. So I will added my LinkedIn profile link there. So yeah, you can send me something if you want to. So where do you find your inspirations for my designs? So again, I kind of start by looking at competitor websites. So we have a couple of competitors, or that we deem competitors, at BCS. So we start by looking at what they're doing. We also look out there at different like leading organisations that are similar to us. So I referred to some banking websites to develop some of the content for those that I showed briefly. Also looking at those awards.com, Dribble, just for inspiration on kind of UI, best practice UI right now. So yeah, looking at competitor websites and looking at what kind of other UI and UX designers are doing right now is kind of my two things that I do. And I think that is a link to have a look. So yeah, I will have a look at that.
Okay, I think that's all the questions we have, I believe, because I don't think there is any more questions. Thank you, Ms. Dempsey, for your time. We, as the MEC BCS student chapter, we're grateful that you accepted our invitation, and this has been a really fruitful presentation. It taught me a lot of things, and I'm sure the attendees here have learned a lot as well. We hope to have you in an upcoming event as well to collaborate again. It was really nice of you to be here.
Thank you. No worries. No. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you for being here. I will share the Instagram link for the attendees in the chat box. If you guys would like to follow our student chapter, you can do that. So yeah, thank you once again, Ms. Dempsey.
Thank you. Have a good day.
You too.